The major myth, in my opinion, is what I refer to as misery versus mercy. There has come to be, over the years, this idea that death is a miserable experience, that it's filled with pain, nausea, vomiting, weakness, immobility, and that the only choice you have is to die a life of misery or to have mercy, which is we in the medical aid in dying group have sort of claimed this role of being the merciful route. You take medications to die, within an hour or two you are dead, you avoid all of that misery of mercy, and this is how we have promulgated the idea of medical aid in dying, because if we don't convince the public, in this particular case, I'm talking about the advocates, the political advocates for medical aid in dying who passed these laws, if we don't convince them that death is filled with misery, then why would they vote for mercy and the right to medical aid in dying? So there's this dichotomy, this very false dichotomy that has been presented, which is that you have two choices, misery versus mercy, when indeed there is an enormous spectrum of how to die with dignity and how to die well, that between misery and mercy, you get thousands, if not millions, of choices for your particular death, and you follow those lines, not in this very overly simplistic myth of misery versus mercy. So here, how did all this happen? Here's an 89-year-old female patient of mine with melanoma. This melanoma has spread from her skin into her liver, and she says to me, I watched my father die of cancer and it was horrible. I will not die like that, so I am calling you for medications to die, assuming that her death, of course, will also be horrible, and her other choice is to take medications to die, which is medical aid in dying, which is now legal in 11 states in this country. And so let's kind of look at that a little bit. She's 89 years old. When I talked with her, and when someone comes to me and says, I want medications to die, the first thing that we do is we have a nice conversation about, well, what's that about? And in talking with her, I realized that she watched her father die some 45 years ago. And she's thinking of the process of death as if it hasn't changed at all in 45 years, as if the entire field of palliative care and hospice care had not evolved tremendously during that time. And her death would be just like her father's, because those were the choices. So she chooses mercy, which is medical aid in dying, and she wants me to give her medications to die, which I will, of course, do if she wants them. But my job first is to really understand, how does she see her death, and provide her with information about how in the modern world of medicine her death may occur. And then we're going to talk about various choices, and if she wants medications to die, well, sure, that's what I do. But I also want to educate patients to be sure that they're understanding what is death actually like, especially in their individual circumstance. So let's look at this. 68-year-old female calls me. She has leukemia, and she is requesting medications to die because she doesn't want to have a painful death. And so we chat for a while, and I ask her, has anybody ever told you that people with leukemia don't die painful deaths? That leukemia is a death of bone marrow failure where you become anemic and you gradually weaken and gradually fade into a coma and then die over a period of time, and you almost never have severe pain? And she said, no, I've not been told that. And indeed, when we talked it out and I said, you're asking me for medications to die to avoid a painful death, I can reassure you that you are extremely unlikely to have a painful death. But what about your thoughts about this fade away to maybe a prolonged coma and then a gradual death from coma where you fade away into death? Does that bother you at all? And she said, no, that sounds fine. And when we talked it through, there really was only pain that she was afraid of, and that was the end of the conversation. She no longer wanted medications to die. And we gave her information that was helpful in her making plans. Now, again, I believe in the right to medical aid in dying. Had she asked me for medications to die because of even her fears of a painful death, and she felt that that was important to her, that's what I would have done. But first I provided information, not myths, information. And she was able to move on from there. Fact, Dying in pain is the most common fear about dying. When you interview people and take surveys and all that, and you ask people what are they afraid of, what their death might be, the vast majority say, I'm afraid I may die in pain. And that would lead you to the conclusion that pain then must be the most common reason that patients ask to take medications to die. And so when thinking this through, it turns out that pain is not the most common reason that patients ask to take medications to die. The most common reason is fatigue. In fact, in my experience, I almost never have a patient tell me that I'm ready to die now because I'm in severe uncontrollable pain. How do I know that? We have data from virtually every state that talks about why people take medications to die, every one of the legal states. And if you look at this list, this is from Oregon, but it's pretty much replicated in most states. Way down the list of why people decide to take medications to die is this inadequate pain control that's highlighted. And so the myth of inadequate pain control being the cause of death, of why people take medications to die, is just that. It's a myth. They do it because of decreased ability to enjoy life, loss of autonomy. You can go down the list. But in general, we have become so good between hospice and palliative care about taking care of patients' pain, that pain, while it may be their most significant fear, by the time they get to picking a date or deciding if they want medications to die, it's lowest on their list. The most common reason patients choose a date to die, in my experience, is fatigue and exhaustion. And so when I talk to patients, and this is important the way I phrase that, choose a date, this is where people have been given the right to have medications to die, and now they have that difficult decision: do I want to do it this week or next Tuesday or the week after? Do I want to wait more time to see my grandchildren again, or to watch the Super Bowl, or whatever might motivate you? The decision of choosing a date is a complicated one, but the thing I hear always when somebody says, you know, doc, come help me next Tuesday, I am just so tired, I'm done. And I wait until I hear that expression, I'm done, because that's when I know it's become real. And that's when they really ask me to come and help them die.